see if you remember this.
There's a feeling comes a feeling, and it sets my brain a-reeling when I'm listening to the music of a military band. Any tune like Yankee Doodle simply sets me off my noodle. It's that patriotic something that no one can understand. Way down south of the land of cotton, melody untiring, ain't that inspiring? Hurrah, hurrah, we'll join the Jubilee, and that's going down for the Yankees by gum. Red, white, and blue, I am for you. Honest, you're a grand old rag. You're a grand old rag. You're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true under red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast or brag. But your old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the grand old rag.
Who remembers that? I didn't. Okay, that was 1906. Wow. And you know, we learned that in school, but they did not say the grand old rag. They called it the grand old flag. So somewhere along the line, somebody thought to change the words, which I don't really care for the grand old rag. I prefer the flag. Okay, so because of Flag Day and because it's our 250th anniversary, we are going to talk about the flags that have flown over our country. This is not inclusive. There were many of them, many varieties, and they changed frequently. So sometimes this isn't exactly in chronological order. So I have to give it kind of a disclaimer that, you know, before we came and settled, there were over 574 Native American tribes in this land. They did not have flags, though. So after we came, the settlers, they decided that they should have their own flags. So that could be a whole different story. They developed flags after we came. I guess I should be using this. Can you hear me? Can you hear me without it? No? I need it? Okay. All right. I think I'll hold it.
You might find a disconnect.
Hello? Hello? No? It's not working.
We must have shorts.
All right. I'll just talk that much louder. Hello? Hello? No? Okay. So, why are flags used? Well, if we go back to when they started using flags, we have to go back, you know, almost 2,000 years. The Romans did not even use flags, but they did have banners. And a lot of times their banners had the goddess of victory or an animal like the eagle, but they didn't have flags as we know it. But the reason that they started using flags was in battle, they had to see where their troops were. When you have people clashing, you know, and horses and gunfire and smoke, they had to know where their own troops were. So the flag carrier, the person with the banner, with the colors, would say, okay, you know, everybody meet over here. And they also used signals to communicate, so they could, you know, wave it a certain way and it would mean something else. So it was a way of communication. Their designs came from heraldry, so families or countries that had seals, or if they had an animal that represented them. The colors mean something different in every country, so those are kind of contrived. What does a color mean? It's not something international. But if you look at all the countries, they have vast differences in their in their flag design. Being an ex-biology teacher, I figured, oh, you got to know the anatomy of a flag. So every once in a while I'm going to say, oh, well, the canton has this on it. Well, the canton is what we have, the blue part, and sometimes that's called a union. And then the part, you know, that flaps is the fly. It flies. So, the king's colors. I wish this worked. The ensign, and I'll point up here, this is what we're calling the ensign. That was a maritime or merchant type of a flag used on the ships, and that was the one that the British used, and it had different colors on the fly depending on who was using it. So it always had the same union, but if it was royal, it would have a white fly. If it was navy, it would have blue. And then if it was a merchant, it might have the red. So you could see it was kind of like a flag within a flag. The king's colors came from King James. So when Elizabeth I died, she had no children. So the next in line was the Scottish king, James I. So James I was the first one to unite both Scotland and England. So he took the Scottish flag, which is the flag of St. Andrew, and that would be the blue with the white satire. The satire is a cross, sideways cross. Legend has it that St. Andrew, when he was crucified on a satire cross. Then they overlapped it with the St. George cross, which is the white and the red. And it wouldn't be until into the 1800s when they added the St. Patrick's cross. So this is a little different than the British flag you'll see today, which is a combination of St. Andrew, St. George, and St. Patrick all put together. But remember, we were under British rule, so that was the first flag that would be flying over our country. The Bedford flag of 1775. So the Minutemen were the first ones to carry the Bedford flag, and there was a person called Nathaniel Page. His family kind of designed it, but he also held the flag during the battle, and it stayed in his family almost to the present. And it's the only complete flag from that era. All of the others made of silk didn't last long, or they went through battle, or they weren't taken care of. So this is really the only intact flag from that early 1770 era. And the picture on it has cannonballs. Those are the little white cannonballs. And the Latin ribbon is conquer or die. So that was the Minuteman's motto. And it is, it's funny, it used to have silver fringe on it. And then in the early 1800s, Nathaniel Page's granddaughter was making a ball gown, and she needed fringe. So she cut the fringe off of that flag and put it on her ball gown. So if you see it, it's in the archives. It's very tattered on the ends because she needed the glitz. So the Gadsden flag was designed by Christopher Gadsden, and it first was flown on the ship the Alfred. And the Alfred had been an English ship called the Black Prince, but then it was sold to the American colonies, and they renamed it the Alfred. And Colonel Hopkins was the first one to fly this flag. So the snake, the "Don't Tread on Me," it has a really kind of funny beginning. Ben Franklin published a cartoon, a political cartoon, and I don't know that he actually drew the cartoon. A lot of times he published things under a different name, but it was published in his paper in 1754. And it had a picture of a snake, and the snake was cut up into a whole bunch of pieces, and it was supposed to represent England being cut up into the different colonies. And to bring that snake together, to unite it, would have been the colonies united together, so they didn't want to be stepped on or tread on or cut up anymore. So that's where the Gadsden flag symbol comes from. And so that was one of the few flown at first. The different colonies might have had different flags, and then the Navy had different flags, the Minutemen had different flags. So they kind of jump around. There is no united flag at this point. Now we have to remember that the British were not the first to this country. The Spanish were. Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, and that's when, you know, like you plant the flag on the moon, that's when the flag of Spain came to this country, this land. And then they settled in the 1500s, St. Augustine in Florida, and St. Augustine is our oldest city, our oldest continuous city, still there today, but we were under the Castilian and flag of Leon. Those were the two families at the time that were ruling in Spain. Now remember, the French also had claims to a lot of this territory. So what the Spanish didn't take, the French did. And then the English were along the coast. And the French via Canada got into the interior. So, you know, when you look at our whole country, it had been broken up and ruled by different countries several times, and they switched hands several times. So the Bourbon flag, or the French territory flag with the fleur-de-lis on it. The fleur-de-lis, the flower, is supposed to represent purity and the Virgin Mary. So they were very Catholic, very religious, and that was the symbol of the French flag. And the Bourbons were the family that ruled at the time, so that was their colors. The Bourbon family married into the Spanish royalty. Back in the day, if you were, you know, royalty, you could only marry royalty, which meant you had to marry outside of your country, and they also were married off to keep the peace. So the Bourbon flag, you can see that in both the Spanish and the French flags. And then there's the French tricolor. That's the original red, white, and blue. And it's kind of interesting when you look at the colors of flags. There's almost no flags in the world that don't have either red, white, and blue in it. I think Jamaica is like one of the only ones that doesn't use one of those three colors. And the French did have meaning. The blue was for loyalty, the white was for purity, and the red was for blood or unity. And this is a painting that was done, I don't even know who did the painting, but it was supposed to depict one of the battles, and it shows that the tricolor flag was flown. A lot of times we have to refer back to paintings of the period because they didn't have photography, and sometimes those paintings weren't even done until 20 or 30 years later, so they would have to ask people, they would have to do some research, and sometimes they took liberties, but it's the best proof that that flag did fly at the time. An appeal to heaven. This is the pine tree flag. This is just an inset. The pine tree flag just had the pine tree on it. Sometimes it had a different color fly with the pine tree in it. This was the flag of New England. And the pine tree being one of those varieties that can live forever. There's pinyon pines that are over 1,000 years old. So they thought, yes, the white pine, that would be a good symbol for us, to live forever and to be strong. But really they used it because as the colonists acquired land and ownership of the land, the British still came over onto private property because it was their land, and they would go around and they would mark with an arrow, a 3-slash arrow, all of the big white pines. And that meant they belonged to the crown and no one could cut them down. And if you were caught cutting them down, there were big fines and whippings to pay. So the New Englanders, mainly Puritans, not only didn't like the fact that they couldn't use their own pine trees, but the British were using these pine trees as the masts for the ships on the slave ships. So they were against slavery, and they felt like they didn't want any part of it, and by taking their trees and making masts, that was going to be their symbol. They were going to fight it. So they actually had a little skirmish, and this was called the Pine Tree Rebellion, and it was before the Boston Tea Party. So there's a lot of these little parties that we don't usually, hear about. So it's one of those lost stories that, if you didn't look into it, you would never know. This is the Moultrie flag, and it was designed by Colonel Moultrie, and he was stationed on Sullivan Island, Fort Sullivan, South Carolina. And it was up to him to defend that area. Well, their soldiers at that time wore that crescent on their hats and on their clothes, and their uniforms were dyed with indigo, so they were very, very blue. As time progressed, blue started fading into gray as far as being used as official colors, because they couldn't get the dyes anymore. So at the time, they had enough dye, they could make the flag blue, and they don't know what that little crescent is supposed to mean, but a lot of sources think it's a gorget. And if you picture pictures of George Washington or any Revolutionary soldier, they have a white collar wrapped high around their neck. And that goes back to the medieval times when they would have chainmail or metal around their neck to protect their necks from being slashed. And so it's symbolic of protection. So they think that's probably where the crescent originated from. Oh, I love that song. So Fort Sullivan, being in South Carolina, was made out of palmetto logs. And if anybody's ever been to Florida or the South and you've seen a palmetto log, it's very spongy because it's a grass. It's not a real tree. So they took these spongy palmetto logs and they built their fort. Well, that wasn't very strong, but the flag was flying. And then the flag got shot down. And Colonel William Jasper climbed over and jumped over that palm tree wall, and he grabbed the flag and he came back on the other side and hoisted it back up, and that rallied the troops, like their flag is not going to come down. And so they won the battle and maintained the South Carolina, that area. And the Taunton flag. So the Sons of Liberty, and that would be famous people that you know, like John Hancock, Paul Revere, Ben Franklin, Patrick Henry. These were the early rabble-rousers. They were the ones that wanted independence. And so this is the flag that they used. And they used liberty and union. they wanted liberty from Britain, but they still wanted to be part of them. They wanted to be separate, but still, you know, remain friends. So they used the British flag in their flag to represent the fact that, yeah, you know, we have British roots, but we would like to be, you know, independent. Cut those apron strings. And that comes from Taunton, Massachusetts. And the first time it was raised was in 1772 on a 12-foot liberty pole. When they raised flags on a pole, they called them liberty poles. They also used the Sons of Liberty flags that had the snake on it. And if you count the stripes, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you think, wait, there were 13 colonies. Well, only 9 really wanted to rebel. So the Sons of Liberty, when they put up their flags, they only have 9 stripes to represent those that were going to fight with them. The Hessians, the Germans, they also came over to fight. And if you think about history, it kind of makes sense. The King George III, who fought against George Washington, George against George, his grandfather, George I, who followed Queen Anne, she had no children, so her cousin, King George I, had to take over, but he was German. He spoke no English, not a word. And here he is, the King of England, and can't speak the language. How about that? Well, now you've got his grandson, and so they still have a strong German root to them. So it makes sense that they would have a good relationship with Germany. And Germany was all about making money. Oh yeah, we will sell you our troops. And they charged them so much money that they used the money that they saved rather than feeding their troops and paying their troops. Well, British was doing that. So they could build their roads and their towns, and that really was a boost to the German economy back in the day. So the Hessians, as they came over, they represented a prince, a German prince. So they would have what was called a white flag or a body flag, and that had the picture that represented whatever principality they were from. They also had their different troop flags, and that could vary. So many, many, many different Hessian flags. When you're going to war, it is a great humility to have your flag stolen. It's just, you know, embarrassment, humiliating. So when George Washington crossed the Delaware in the Battle of Trenton, they managed to capture 15 Hessian flags, which is quite the feat. And it was just humiliating. So it hurt their pride. But anyway, so there's very many different Hessian flags, and we captured a lot of them. The first troop, Philadelphia City Cavalry of Light Horse Flag. Boy, that's a mouthful. This is the first flag ever to have the 13 stripes on it. And it represented the Native Americans. It had the Archangel on it. For them we serve. And it is the only flag that is still in use today. The Philadelphia National Guard still uses that flag, so it has been active since then. And George Washington's bodyguards flew that flag. They were from the Philadelphia Cavalry. And they are the only military group that owns its own armory. The government doesn't own it. They themselves own it. And it is voluntary. They do not get paid. They never did. They were a voluntary group, and And they still use them with the National Guard, so they still are going overseas carrying that flag, which I think is pretty impressive. And the Grand Union. So the first Navy ensign used the Alfred. It was used on the Alfred again. We heard that, you know, back a few flags. But now we've come to the point where, okay, we're starting to unify and we need to have a flag that represents all of us. So this is the first one unofficially that represented our country. Again, it still had the British St. George and St. Andrew cross on it, were the British flag, but it has the 13 stripes for the colonies. And George Washington actually raised this flag when he formed the first Continental Army. So again, this is the first unofficial flag of our country. And everybody recognizes, right? The first official flag in 1776 with the 13 stripes and the 13 stars. And strangely enough, when this was designed and passed as our official flag, there was no meaning tied to the colors. You know, you could say, oh, the white's for purity, the blue is for valor. It had no meaning at the time. It was never designated as anything. So, the story of Betsy Ross. We were all told lies, right? From grammar school. Betsy Ross. She made the flag. Okay, now there's a difference between making the flag and designing the flag. And a lot of times that's never distinguished. But, you know, we're told, well, we were taught lies. Betsy Ross never made the flag. There was a man from New Jersey, and he actually signed the Declaration of Independence. His name was Francis Hopkinson, and he was from Bordentown, New Jersey. And having been raised in New Jersey, New Jerseyites are all about New Jersey people. And he is the one who said he designed the flag. Well, okay, the 13 stripes had been there already. So how hard was it to design stars in a circle? I don't know. But he did build the Senate. He built them for his design. But being the good politician that he was, he did not ask for money. He asked for wine in payment. But he didn't get it either. But he is in the records, and Betsy Ross is not in the records. So it wasn't until 100 years later, her grandson came up with this story. Oh, well, my grandma designed that flag. My grandma made that flag. And that's the first time it was ever even mentioned, 100 years later. So people believed the story. And then they said, no, it was Francis Hopkins, you know, forget Betsy. But then now people are looking back and saying, well, you know, Betsy was an upholsterer. She was an upholsterer for over 50 years. And her best customer was the United States Navy. So she was already making flags. Now her grandson claims that they wanted a 6-pointed star. And they were like, well, that's too much like the Star of David. And then Betsy Ross was like, well, that's too hard to make. And she folded a piece of paper and she snipped it. And with one snip, you can get the 5-star. Oh, this is so much easier. Okay, so Betsy is the one, supposedly, according to the story, that gave us the 5-point star. Whether she did or not, we'll never know. But she did already have a contract with the U.S. Navy making flags for our country. And then, quite coincidentally, her husband's uncle was on the flag committee. So there was a family tie there. And they found a bill in May 1777 that she billed them, and it was quite a lot of money, for flag or flags. Then, 2 months later, the design was released. So people are going, coincidence? Here she gets paid a large sum of money, and all of a sudden we have this new flag. So maybe we'll never know. There's evidence on both sides, but maybe she didn't design it, but she actually sewed it. But we'll never know. It's a good story, though. So the cowpins. We have this official flag, right? But there was no rules as to how the stars could be arranged. So nobody knowing the rules would have somebody make a flag and say, oh, make me a flag with 13 stars. And they would go in different designs and patterns. We are just used to, the circle as being the most popular. So Will Batchelor carried this in the Battle of Cowpens. It was just one of those major battles, and they thought it had been used before 1781. But there was a German artist by Kenneth Kemmelmeyer, and he drew painted another painting, and it had that flag in it, so they could at least date it to 1781, even though stories are it might have been a little bit older than that. And Star Spangled Banner. So this is a replica of the Star Spangled Banner with all of it, the holes blown in, and Francis Scott Key is on the ship and he sees it, and the next morning after all the smoke clears, he writes the poem, because it's still there flying. This one has 15 stripes on it, right? It's a little different because back in the day, they were going to add a star and a stripe for every new state. Eventually they were like, we're going to have a lot of stripes. This is going to be a big flag. So let's just keep it to the original 13. So they had to go back to the original 13, but they just kept adding stars. And when they add the stars, they add them not when a state became a state, but they waited until the 4th of July. And that's when they would officially be put on the flag. Yes, we even had the Russian flag. So, Russia owned part of this land, Alaska and down the California coast. So the Russian flag, and they were Russian Americans, and so this is the flag that they flew, and it was flown mainly on the ships that would go between Alaska and Russia. But then Tsar Alexander decided he was going to sell. That was the worst mistake of his life, right? He sold it to us for about $7.2 million back in the day. And that was in the 1867. Still has red, white, and blue on it, though. Red, white, and blue across the world on flags is very popular. Oh, how many people have heard of the Bonnie Blue? No? Well, I went to high school in Florida, so I've heard the Bonnie Blue. If you live in the South, you've heard the Bonnie Blue. The Bonnie Blue was the official flag of the Republic of Western Florida. Did you even know it existed? We've heard of the Republic of Texas, but there is a Republic of Western Florida. And so Florida is all Spanish at the time, but you have some English settlers moving down to Florida, God knows why, and they get there and they're like, oh, look, the 13 colonies, they're getting more and more. We want to be annexed. We want to be part of that great country. And they were looked over. Oh, they were so disappointed. So they went behind the back of the Spanish and they went to the French governor, who at that time had the New Orleans area, and they said, hey, can you get us in, do something for us? Oh, sure, I can do that. Well, he stabbed him in the back. They were so mad that they rallied the troops of the Republic of Western Florida, and they marched to Baton Rouge, and they captured the city of Baton Rouge. They captured the governor, and they won. So a couple months later, President Madison annexed them, and they became part of the United States. So the Bonnie Blue became the second most popular song in the South, next to Dixie. Actually, it was at the time, this was way before the Civil War. I'm going to try and play that for you because you probably have heard it and didn't know you heard it. But it still is, well, you know, they play Dixie, but anybody in the South would know the Bonnie Blue.
We are a band of brothers and native to the soil, fighting for our liberty with treasure, blood and toil. And when our hats were threatened, the cry rose near and far, hurrah for the Bonnie Blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah, for Southern rights, hurrah, hurrah for the Bonnie Blue flag that bears a single star. As long as the Union was faithful to her trust, like friends and like brethren, kind we were and just. But now when Northern treachery attempts our rights to mar, we'll hoist on high the Bonnie Blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah, for Southern rights, hurrah, hurrah, for the Bonnie Blue flag that bears a single star.
Isn't that a great song? I love that song. Sorry you didn't get to see the video. I don't know what the heck, why it's not showing up there. But anyway, and that flag has been incorporated into several southern state flags. That single star. And the rebellion was called the Kemper Rebellion. That's what made, you know, South Florida or West Florida fight against Baton Rouge. Let's see. And that tune was from an Irish folk song, and you have to realize, you know, if you look at the history of most of the people in the Deep South, they were from Scotch-Irish descent. So the Scotch and Irish music played prevalent in a lot of their songs. Okay. Did I freeze up? Oh. Okay, got a little glitch there. Okay, so in 1818, they passed the Flag Act, and this is the one that determined, okay, we can't have all these stripes, we're just going to stick to 13, and then whenever we add a state, we're going to add the star on the 4th of July. So the next ones to be added, we're going to be Vermont and Kentucky, bringing it up to 15 stars. Well, I don't know why am I, Okay, individual state flags, so I figured I better put Iowa up there. And technically, we really shouldn't use the word flag. So when states started thinking, you know, we should have our own state flags, the Grand Republic of the Grand Army of the Republic that fought in the Civil War were very, very upset. They said, we fought for the unity of this country, and you want to break it apart with separate flags. and they fought it. They did not want individual state flags. So they changed the name and called them banners. So it technically is not a state flag, it is a state banner, so as not to upset those who served, the veterans. The Iowa state flag was developed by the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, and they designed a lot of the state banners. Ours was designed by Dixie Gephardt, and she used, anybody recognize the background of that? That's the French flag. Because we were the Louisiana Purchase, right? We belonged to France. So our flag is the French flag with the American eagle on it. Kind of a neat story, isn't it? And then there's those states that have had many flags. So if you ever go to Texas and you go to, they've got a great park called Six Flags over Texas. It's because they have had Six Flags over their state. And, you know, it started, you know, they had the French, they had the Spanish, then they were under Mexican rule, and remember the Alamo? Still under Mexican rule, and the guys fighting the Alamo were trying to take that area away from Mexico. That's when Santa Anna came charging in and said, this is Mexico, you can't have it. So then Texas became a republic, and then it joined the Confederacy, and then it joined the US. Now there's a myth that says that Texas, because it was a republic, can always secede from the Union, and it can't. That is a myth. According to the Constitution, no state can leave. However, in their 1845 articles of annexation, it was written in there that Texas could technically divide into 5 states. So it couldn't legally cede and become its own country or republic, but it could divide. Whether it would or not, I don't know. But they say Texas on its own could probably survive because of all the states, it's like, it doesn't need anybody else economically. It's got all that oil. And then we have the Confederate flag. So, you know, we go through all the trouble of fighting for this country and fighting for independence, and we have one flag, the Star-Spangled Banner. But then, because of slavery and because of economics, we have some states that move out and they become a confederation. There were 3 Confederate flags. This was the first one. But in battle, remember that smoke and all? How could you tell the difference? You're looking at 2 flags, this one and this one, and all that smoke, and you're like, oh, where do I go? So they thought, well, that was a mistake. So then they changed to just this. It was all white, no red stripe. And that was called the stainless. But when the wind wasn't flapping, what did it look like? I surrender. It was all white. So they were like, well, that's not going to work. So they put the blood stain so that people knew, oh, no, we're not surrendering. We just have a white flag. The flag of Dixie that we always think of never was the official flag. It was those other 3 flags. But it became a symbol of the South, a symbol of Southern pride. It also is a symbol of racism and slavery. So there's lots of controversy over that. And they're not sure where the name Dixie came from. Most historians believe it came directly from the Mason-Dixon line. Because, you know, right below Pennsylvania, you have that Mason-Dixon line, and the South was Dixon or Dixon, which makes sense. So now we get up to, you know, the 48 stars from 1912 to 1959. President Taft made the standard that said, okay, this is how the stars are going to be arranged, because up to now you could put those stars really any way you want. So they also came up with the flag code, and the flag code tells you how you can display the flag, you know, the etiquette, and there's so many rules, and we break them every day. I broke it here. You're never supposed to drape a flag. And then you should have the Union on the left. And then if it's not in, if it's just, you know, on a stick, it should be held or put in a stand, because you don't want the flag touching anything. Sadly, it is. It's over here touching the... You aren't supposed to use the flag in decoration. Well, come 4th of July, you're going to see it on T-shirts. Can't be used in advertising, and it can't be used on our 4th of July cups and our paper plates. And yes, we all break that law, don't we? Even putting it in a commercial and having the flag flown is technically against it. So when they had the code, it did become law, but it is not a law that you have to follow. It's actually a strong suggestion. So like when your flag gets tattered, it's suggested that you respectfully burn it. So give it to the American Legion, or like here you can go to City Hall and drop it in a canister. Boy Scouts, they do it, and they will respectfully burn it. When you hoist the flag up, it should be from, you know, daylight morning till evening. Shouldn't fly at night. If it has to fly at night, it has to have lights on it. And if it's going to fly at half-mast, you want to lift it all the way to the top and bring it back down. And then when you take it down, you lift it to the top and you bring it down. You just don't cheat and go to the middle. That's cheating. You got to go all up, yeah. Our flag does not get tipped for any reason. So if you're a banner carrier, to tip the flag like that is a sign that you're bowing down to something. You will notice in the procession at the Olympics, the hosting country has their flag, and as the countries come in, they tip to that host country. The United States is the only one that does not do that. We're the only ones who do not bow our flag. We do not bow our flag to the president. It does not get bowed to anyone. Interesting rule. So there's all kinds of fun little facts. And if you've ever watched the show Big Bang Theory with Sheldon Cooper and fun facts with flags, I was going to do a clip and I couldn't find one, but it was very, very fun, very interesting. And then, of course, 1959 and 60, we get Alaska and Hawaii, and those are the last ones to be added. So, I just gave you the quiz. Thanks for listening. This was brought to you, presentation of Limestone Bluffs, RC&D, and the DAR, the Lawrence Van Hook chapter. Yeah.
Question, ready for questions?
Yeah, sure.
Well, first one, is it illegal to wear it on your t-shirt?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. No, okay. So it's not illegal. It's against the code. It's against the code. I have American flag cushions on my patio, and
Okay, two real questions.
yeah,
On the maritime flag, is that square area, the Union, is that what you call
Yeah.
it? Does that represent the country that that ship is
the Union or the Canton. Yeah.
represents?
Yeah.
And then the flag part of it indicates whether it's a commercial or what type of ship it is?
And that was the British rule. That's how their flags and how our flags were going. I don't know if today there is a distinguishing,
Okay.
you know, I don't know if they still do that today, but
Okay.
back in the day you would see, you know, the country and the Canton. And then going way back, the original flags were square. and they became bigger and bigger. But then I think it's, I can't remember if it's the Moultrie. I won't go back. Fabric was so expensive that they started shortening them into squares again. You know, they thought, why add that extra couple inches?
Second question, flying a flag upside down.
Right, and that is supposed to be only in extreme duress.
You know where that came from?
I don't know where that came
Okay,
from.
just curious.
Yeah, but yeah, I do know that people inappropriately fly the flag upside down. You know, just because you're upset does not mean your country is in dire stress. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Anything else for the good? No? Okay. Well, like Bonnie said, for the Historical Society meeting in July, I am going to be presenting on Althea Sherman. She is a local, well, she was a local. She was born in 1853. She was an ornithologist, a worldwide ornithologist, bird lady, and an artist and a teacher. And she was fascinating, and she was from Clayton County. So within an hour's drive from here, you could go see her museum and her swallow tower. Very interesting. Okay.
Thank you.